Welcome once again to our series that is Gospel Order and Organization. And we are looking at number 15 in the series, which is Hoovering Ministers, Tithes, and Accountability. This is one of those thorny places to touch on when you are speaking about organization, Gospel Order and Organization, and church issues. You know, there is a need of a great reformation in our ranks. The ministers who are drawing pay from the conference need to ask themselves the question, am I a faithful worker? Am I a spiritual help to the church? The minister himself has to ask before even the people actually ask such a question. You should sit down with yourself, and I should sit down with myself and ask myself this question, am I a faithful worker? Am I a spiritual help to the church? Reason being, there are those who demand high wages for their labors, but who bring few souls into the truth to stand steadfast and true to its principles. And so it's a time for our ministers to humble their hearts before the Lord and bear straight, convincing testimony to the people. It is time for them to labor earnestly to increase the membership of the churches, leading all to a thorough understanding of the truth for this time. The Lord wants living members in the church, men and women who will encourage one another in faithful service. And the least we can do is to sit in our churches as ministers and babysit those who are coming into truth. This is not to negate the truth that those who have come into truth for the first time, they need to be nurtured. And also those who have been in the truth, there are some things they have to be reminded and be told to do. And one of the jobs of the minister is to train the members of the church he is raising up so that when he leaves it in the hands of the elder or Bible workers, it's a strong functioning church. This work should be mostly accomplished before an elder is put in place. This does not negate the fact that ministers will still stop occasionally to give messages of hope and encouragement, as even Paul visited other churches and spoke to them. But hovering takes place after the church has been raised up and organized, and the pastor continues to put most of his time in that church as it is easy, lazy work. The ministers of such a time as this have to move in the fields rather than babysitting others who can feed themselves. And we are told that the members should reach at a time when they can tell the minister, you go forth and labor, but what we will do, we will sustain our church, and we will sustain you wherever you are going with our offerings. I want to bring you to a story of one American businessman, and it's a touching story from the book Christian Service, but original from the Testimonies to the Churches, volume 6, page 29 and 30. An American businessman who was an honest Christian in conversation with a fellow worker remarked that he himself worked for Christ 24 hours of the day. In all my business relations, he said, I try to represent my master. As I have opportunity, I try to win others to him. All day I am working for Christ, and at night while I sleep, I have a man working for him in China. In explanation, he added, in my youth, I determined to go as a missionary to the heathen, but on the death of my father, I had to take up his business in order to provide for the family. Now, instead of going myself, I support a missionary in such a town of such a province of China. My worker is stationed, and so even while I sleep, I am, through my representative, still working for Christ. Are there not Seventh-day Adventists who will do likewise? Instead of keeping the ministers at work for the churches that already know the truth, let the members of the churches say to these laborers, go work for souls that are perishing in darkness. We ourselves will carry forward the services of the church. We will keep up the meetings, and by abiding in Christ, we'll maintain spiritual life. We will work for souls that are about us, and we will send our prayers and our gifts to sustain the laborers in more needy and destitute field. As long as churches rely upon laborers from abroad to strengthen and encourage their faith, they will not become strong in themselves. They should be instructed that their strength will increase in proportion to their personal efforts. The more closely the New Testament plan is followed in missionary labor, the more successful will be the efforts put forth. I wish to tell you that soon there will be no work done in ministerial lands but medical missionary work. The work of a minister is to minister. Our ministers are to work on the gospel plan of ministering. It has been presented to me that all through America there are barren fields, and we are now talking about all throughout the world. As I traveled through the South on my way to conference, I saw city after city that was unworked. What is the matter? The ministers are hovering over churches, which know the truth while thousands are perishing out of Christ. If the proper instruction were given, if the proper methods were followed, every church member will do his work as a member of the body. He will do Christian missionary work, but the churches are dying and they want a minister to preach to them. They should be taught to bring a faithful tithe to God that he may strengthen and bless them. They should be brought into working order that the breath of God may come to them. They should be taught that unless they can stand alone without a minister, they need to be converted anew and baptized anew. They need to be born again. Again, we are told, that is General Conference Bulletin, April 12, 1901. In Australasian Conference review, God has given all something to do. Those who are willing to work in self-denial and self-sacrifice will find their place. But those who seek only a safe and easy place need to be converted. Until their hearts are renewed, their purposes change, God has no use for them in his work. By an unreserved consecration, we are to prepare ourselves for his service. Our ministers are not to hover over the churches, regarding the churches in some particular place as their special care. And our churches should not feel jealous and neglected if they do not receive ministerial labor. They should themselves take up the burden and labor most earnestly for souls. Believers are to have root in themselves, striking firm root in Christ, that they may bear fruit to his glory. And so we find that there is no reason for any minister who is on tithes to be hovering over any church, to be lulling the church members to sleep and to expect his labor every day and every night. In fact, a minister who doesn't train up church members to be self-reliant in gospel work is not doing the work that he is being paid to do, because the work of a pastor is to bring souls into truth and then train them to sustain themselves and be independent and do the work of God. And so, upon all who believe God has placed the burden of raising up churches, the express purpose of the church is to educate men and women to use their entrusted capabilities and talents, so that they may not be found like the foolish virgins of the book of Matthew chapter 25, who are not using their talents. They buried them, and when the master came, what did they have? They had buried their talents, and they said, "We knew you are a hard master." If the ministers of the gospel will not do their appointed work to train up the church members, then they will be teaching them to bury their talents, and their blood will be upon them. And so our churches, large or small, are not to be treated in such a way that they will be helplessly dependent upon ministerial aid. The members are to be established in the faith, that they will have an intelligent knowledge of the true missionary work. They are to follow Christ's example, ministering to those around them. Faithful, they are to fulfill their vows made at their baptism. And the vows made at baptism is that you are going to enter into the service of the Lord. You are not going to be a tree cumbering the grounds. The members of the church should work together to keep the church alive, and the principles of self-denial and sacrifice, which Christ showed the world by coming from heaven and being here on earth, should also move them to move from their comfort places to places where they will be able to meet the hardship, but not hardship per se, but to work on bringing souls into truth. And so, where are the churches? My heart is ached my heart was ached when I was in California, and I'll blow this one out so that we may share together. Ye are laborers with God. Where are the churches? My heart ached when I was in California. There are young men traveling around and around in churches, but where is the power? Where is the power to open the fields for them and to say, here we are, not to stay with the people that know the truth. Here is a field that knows nothing about it, and this field is to be converted and educated as far as they will yield to the truth. But the seeds of the truth must be sown. Lift up your heads, for the fields are all ripe with the harvest, lift up your heads, for the fields are all ripe with the harvest. But he wanted them to look at it, and he wanted them to see, and he wants every one of you to see it and to feel your hands full. But these who travel from place to place and from place to place to look after the churches, God help you by giving you the spirit of the message that your souls shall yearn after other souls, and you will not let go until they are converted. This is the work we want to see done. And until that spirit comes in and takes hold of every mind in every conference that they are conducting, that they are elevating, the very light should be elevated. Health reform that they are elevating by the self-denial and self-sacrifice. And so members of various churches need to release their pastors, these sitting pastors and hovering pastors, to go out in the field and win the souls to Christ. Continuing on in Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, James White has to say, we have no settled pastors over our churches, but our ministers are all missionaries, ours were the early ministers of Jesus Christ. Consequently, they are most of their time deprived of the blessing of their home. Our ministers must be regarded as very economical in the expenses and abundant in their labors. Most of them preach from 200 to 300 discourses in a year. Again, Uriah Smith had to say this. In explaining how the Seventh-day Adventists organized their local churches as they were planted, he wrote, "This is exceedingly simple. A body of believers associate together, taking the name Seventh-day Adventist and attaching their names to a covenant simply to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. The Bible is their only creed. A clerk is chosen to keep the records of the church, and an elder elected by vote of the church is ordained to look after the spiritual interest. If the church is large, its temporal affairs are assigned to one or more deacons chosen by vote of the church for this purpose. None of the churches have pastors established with them. They maintain their worship without the aid of a preacher, only as one may occasionally visit them, leaving the ministers free to devote almost their whole time to carrying these views to those who have never heard upon them." In 1886, Sister White said, "Do not, my ministering brethren, allow yourself to be kept at home to serve tables, and do not hover around the churches, preaching to those who are already fully established in the faith. Teach the people to have light in themselves and not to depend upon the ministers. They should have Christ as their helper and should educate themselves to help one another, so that the minister can be free to enter new fields. An important work is to be done in the world. New fields are to be opened, and the zeal and the missional spirit that Christ manifested are greatly needed, or that the power of God will set the truth home to every heart, or that all might see the necessity of having a living connection with God and of knowing and doing His will from day to day. We have not settled pastors over churches as pastors to any large extent. In some of the very large churches, we have elected pastors, but as a rule, we have held ourselves ready for field service, evangelistic work, and our brethren and sisters have held themselves ready to maintain their church services and carry forward their church work without settled pastors. And I hope this will never cease to be the order of affairs in this Seventh-day Adventist denomination. For when we cease our forward movement work and begin to settle over our churches, to stay by them and do their thinking and their praying and their work that is to be done, then our churches will begin to weaken and lose their life and spirit and become paralyzed and fossilized, and our work will be on a retreat. That is the President A.G. Daniels. Again, A.G. Daniels continuing to say, "Now when I entered upon the ministry, I never expected to do anything else but to preach the message in new fields. I had not the remotest idea of anything else. It never entered into my head nor heart nor was it a desire. I had one thought, and that was to go out and preach the third angel's message to people who did not know it. I did not think of anything else for a long time. As any man of any reason will do, I began to study how to do that work most successfully. That led me to study methods of labor, policies, ways of working, and I'll say, brethren, that for a dozen years or 13, I think it was, my whole time was spent in what we may call the fieldwork, evangelistic endeavor. I had no conference responsibilities, nothing in the way of administration. I was just plowing all the time in new fields. And so this is Delafield, D.A. letter to Pastor J. Webb in 1980. He says, the genius of our work is that we are convert conscious. Our war is upon us if we preach not the gospel. Onward, ever onward, is the overpowering Adventist prepossession. We cannot settle down. We cannot think in terms of appointing full-time ministers to care for little flocks. Their job is to provide an outreach to lead the people themselves into a witnessing program. They are to settle down like mother hens. They are not to settle down like mother hens over little chicks and warm the people with their presence. They are to teach the people how they can warm their own hearts through experience in soul winning work. Nevertheless, elders are to be appointed in every church. Laymen are to be the ones in charge. And so you find that when this church was organized, it was a rule that they didn't have sitting pastors, or they didn't allow ministers to hover over churches. The elders were in charge of the churches, and the laymen were in charge of spiritual matters, and the deacons to some extent were also there for the temporal needs of the people. This idea of having sitting pastors is actually a move backward and not a move forward. And so the ministers had to go outside, they had to have bodies of believers brought into truth in new places, and then recommend an immediate formation of the church, which was left under an elder. And if an elder was not found fit in that place, then social meetings were continued till such a time as individuals became thoroughly acquainted with each other and ascertained with whom they can fellowship, and who qualified for important duties of officers in the church. And when the proper time came when these were established, then the ministers were called back so that with the help of the church and these social meetings, they may be able to put elders in the office and Bible workers and laymen who had had an experience to be able to continue in the spiritual nourishing of the church. And so until the people ascertained who was fit to be an elder and a Bible worker, social meetings were continued and trainings continued of the people who could be filling the offices in the church. And so in some places where actually our pioneers went to preach, there were limited circumstances towards securing advantages of having a people who could be Bible workers and elders, and even having buildings. And this was one of the difficulties that the church faced at such a time. But as persons got interested in the truth, the ministers were availed, tents were put together, and our work continued in that place maybe for 6 months until a thorough work was accomplished in that place. And then a church was raised up. It was not just a meeting of 2 weeks at some place, and then a church was put in place, and then a sitting pastor was put there. No. If a new field was entered in, it was 6 months or 1 year laboring in that place until people came into truth, and even ministers were trained who could fill the offices of that are in the church. And so today, we think that we can do a thorough work by having an evangelistic meeting of 1 week or 2 weeks, and then what we do is take a global pioneer and put in that place, and as the church becomes stronger, we in our own view, we put a sitting pastor there. This is not how, when organization and gospel order were brought into this church, this is not what was done. And so let us learn from our pioneers and how they were more successful in their work. And, one way of holding our ministers responsible is being faithful tithers and to be bringing faithful tithes and offering. Once we do that, then we can have a voice that, Pastor, we do not want you in this church. We want to send you in the field and sustain you there. There we will have a voice. But many a times we are not also faithful in our tithes and offering. And so to hold the minister accountable that you want to send them out, he will ask you, how am I going to go out? I have a family and I have needs and all that. We are not saying that the ministers should be, the families and everything should be thrown onto the church to take care of. But if we are faithful giving tithes and offering, we need to account for this. We cannot have people who have the truth having a hovering minister or a sitting minister. That is a wrong use of tithe. Tithe cannot be paid to people who are not working. When you have a minister in the church preaching to the people who already know the truth, that minister is not doing anything. You are really paying wages where actually there is no labor. And that is a very bad way of really managing the funds. And so we should put our money on to the exchanges. We should not put our money where we can't see the work being done. If you see in any locality that the truth is claiming a foothold and there is no place for worship, then do something to meet the necessity. Send the ministers into the field. Don't pay them to sit over the churches. And so God does not lay upon the burden, the conference, the burden to actually send out the ministers. It is the burden of the church members to send out the ministers. We think that it is the work of the conference to tell the minister, go here and go there. No, the people who are giving the tithes are responsible of sending these people somewhere. And it is because we are so comfortable with having our pastors with us and these evangelists and missionaries with us. And so we think that we are doing good when we let them sit with us, but this is a wrong way of managing the church and using our tithes and offering. If the right plans are followed, so much means will not have been used in some localities and so little in other where the ban of truth has not been raised. You find that much money is being used just to have these pastors sitting in the churches and sitting on the committees and solving this matter and solving this matter. In fact, they have been put more on administrative work more than on evangelistic work. You see, our pastors and our evangelists are sitting a meeting after another meeting. And I talked about this, that their work is not administrative work. Their work is to spread the gospel truth. Their work is not to wait on the tables. That is the work of the elders. That is the work of the deacons, by the way. The elders are to train Bible workers. But this idea of ministers really serving the tables, and then we spend so much time on them holding meetings and all that stuff, we are wasting money. And it's a time that we woke up and had an accountability of how God's money is being used. They should make sure that new churches are raised and they are dedicated without a debt. So wherever a company of believers is raised up, a house of worship should be built. Let not the workers leave the place without accomplishing this. And you can find that in Testimonies for the Church, volume 6, page 100, paragraph 2, that no worker, a pastor or an evangelist, has to leave a place unless a thorough work has been done and a congregation raised there and the house of worship dedicated without a debt. And so there are small churches that ever will be small because they place their own interest above the interest of God's cause. While they have large, convenient houses for themselves and are constantly improving their premises, they are content to have a most unsuitable place for worship of God where His holy presence is to dwell, and they are satisfied with the few number they are. They don't have a plan to reach out. They don't have an outreach program. They have always having an inreach program. This is stewardship week of prayer. I don't know, come meeting promotion. You have a mission emphasis. Mission emphasis that there is no mission actually. And you have a lot of inreach happening amongst us more than there is an outreach. And people are satisfied. So this is a wrong way of managing things in the local church. This is a wrong way. This is this is not the way to handle a minister. This is not the way to use the church funds. Having inreach after inreach. It means that people are not growing, and we have been told if this is the case, they need to be converted once again. And so, if the minister labors and there are few believers in a place, we are to put up a neat, humble house, and by dedicating it to God, invite Jesus to come as your guest. And as He comes as your guest, He will sup with you. And what is He saying? He will sup with you. He says in John chapter 6, verse 35, that I'm the bread of life. And so if He will feed you with the bread of life, then you will become mature in that word. And then the next thing, you have to witness of that word. Because Jesus says in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19 and 20, that from verse 18 to 20, that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go into the world to teach, baptize, and teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have shown unto you. So, as Christ is invited into this neat, humble house which has a few people, He sups with them the bread of life. And after supping with them the bread of life, what they need to do is go out and be able to witness. In fact, 2 Timothy 2:2 says that, I'll go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, and I'll look at verse 1 and 2. This is 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. We are told that, thou therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. And so our work is to go outside there and teach what we have been taught. If Christ has dined with us, the bread of life, then we are not to keep to ourselves, but we are to go out and dine also with others, bring them the messages of hope, and so not leave them in a perishing way. And so, as we establish churches, we shall find that there are churches which are rich, there are churches which are poor, and the churches which are poor, they are to be sustained by the churches who are able. And so, the churches which are able. And so, Paul was a master worker. Before passing forward into new territory, Paul and his companion visited the churches that had been established in Pisidia and the regions round about. As they went through the cities, they delivered the decrees to keep that were ordained of the apostles and elders which were at Jerusalem. And so were the churches established in the faith and increased in numbers daily. But they did not hover over these churches. They did not leave them destitute. They did not leave them poor. You find Paul reaching to other churches to help the other churches. You find he is ordaining elders in every city to keep, to set in order the things that are wanting in those cities. But we don't have sitting pastors, hovering pastors, and members of the churches who are paying tithe for the pastors who are not working, but are only sitting there. There is a wrong management of a local church. There is a wrong management of the wrong use of the pastor, and there is a wrong use of tithes and offering. Having these people within us, and their work is to hold meetings. They are serving tables. They are not really working for what they were called to do. And so let me go to this issue of accountability on the part of faithful tithers and offertory givers. This is an issue that we have to learn very well so that we may not be found doing the wrong thing. The churches must arouse, the members must awake out of sleep and begin to inquire, how is the money which we put in the treasury being used? The Lord desired that a close search be made. Are all satisfied with the history of the work for the past 15 years? Where is the evidence of the co-working with God? Where has been heard throughout the churches the prayer of the help of Holy Spirit? Dissatisfied and disheartened, we turn away from the sin. The Grace Collection, page 120, paragraph 3. Every convert to the truth should be instructed in regard to the Lord's requirement for tithes and offering. As churches are raised up, this work must be taken hold of decidedly and carried forward in the Spirit of Christ. All that men enjoy, they receive from the Lord's great farm, and He is pleased to have His heritage, enjoy His goods. But all who stand under the blood-stained banner of Prince Emmanuel are to acknowledge their dependence upon God and their accountability to Him by returning to the treasury a certain portion as His own. Those teachers in the church or in the school who distinguish themselves by their zeal in politics should be relieved of their work and responsibilities without delay, for the Lord will not cooperate with them. The tithe should not be used to pay anyone for speechifying on political questions. Every teacher, minister, or leader in our ranks who is stirred with a desire to ventilate his opinions on political questions should be converted by belief in the truth or give up his work. And so we find that there is an accountability to those who are faithful tithers and offertory givers, that they should make sure that the tithes and offering are being used to raise up churches. They should be sending the ministers to the field to raise up churches. And they should ask them, they should start inquiring, how has been the money that we are giving back to bringing to the church being used? How is this money being used? And those who are involved in speechifying politics should be released and find another work we are told to do rather than being paid from tithes and hold political, ventilate their political positions. And so, you see, we are told that we can be able to sustain our ministers and be able to account for what we are giving. We are told, the matter was laid before me, which I was trying to present before the brethren. There is altogether too much responsibility imparted to a few men in Battle Creek, and these men need the transforming power of the Holy Spirit, else they will lead God's heritage in false paths. The conferences are watching every move made at the end of the work. The different conferences have been led to look to the leading men at Battle Creek, feeling that no important move can be made without their approval. This tendency has been growing stronger until it is a serious hindrance to the advancement of the work. The arrangement that all money must go through Battle Creek and under the control of the few men in that place is a wrong way of managing. There are altogether too many weighty responsibilities given to a few men, and some do not make God their counselor. What do these men know of the necessities of the work in foreign countries? How can they know how to decide the question which come to them asking for information? It will require 3 months for those in foreign countries to receive a response to their question, even if there was no delay in writing. And people may say that there is internet nowadays and emails, but I have been a personal ministry leader in church, and you will find that you will ask for help and it will take even a year for that help to come. There are places where I have been involved in raising Sabbath schools with global pioneers, and you find that churches have been destitute of rent until those Sabbath schools have been closed. And there are places where global pioneers have been not paid. Also, there is the issue that just to ask for money for building the church has taken so much time. This is a wrong way of managing money and doing the things of God. This idea that money should go up and then stream it down, it doesn't sit well sometimes. This condition of things have been created in our conferences and churches under a religious cloak which existed in the world. Confederacies have been formed to make their showing stand out as a superior, and they have gained the name of having done a large work in their responsible position of trust. They flatter themselves that they were doing God service when they were establishing principle of robbery. And so they were depriving their brethren of their rights in gathering everything in the book, lying under their control and making their own laws and rules that were not after God's order at all, but which reveal the very attributes of Satan. And so, you see, we are told that the Lord has not placed any one of his human agencies under the dictation and control of those who are themselves but erring mortals. He has not placed upon men to power to say, you shall do this and you shall not do that. But there is a power exercise in Battle Creek that God has not given, and he will judge those who assume this authority. They have somewhat of the same spirit that led Uzzah to lay his hand on the ark to steady it, as though God was not able to care for his sacred symbols. For far less of man's power and authority should be exercised toward God's human agencies. Brethren, leave God to rule. And so, until we start having accountability and being responsible for our churches, we shall have nothing to stand for. And so, we are in danger of not doing the work of God. Organization and discipline are essential, and there is great danger in departing from the simplicity of the gospel of Christ and putting up machineries after machineries, thinking that we shall be able to do our work with these much machineries. But God's gospel order and organization is simple. Let us have a local church, churches touching churches, not congregational ones, but representative churches. Let them go out and plant churches. Let the delegates and representatives from these churches form the conference, and let the conference be able to oversee the work that is going on. But let the power be invested in the local churches. Let us not have hovering ministers. Let us not have sitting pastors. Let the elders be in charge of local churches. Let the laymen labor in those churches. Let the church members exercise their talents and gifts. Let them be wise virgins who have the word and the oil and that extra oil, so that they may send out the pastors and evangelists to do the work of opening new fields, and let them sustain them by their tithes and offering. But let not the ministers start serving tables. That is the work of the deacons, please. It's not even the work of the elder to serve the table. And so, we have made much the General Conference to be a conscience to us. But we were warned that it is not in the order of God that any man or any class of men should assume that God has made them conscious of their brethren, or put forth their finite hand in patronizing manner to control the Lord's delegated workers, thus endangering the safety of the Lord's heritage, commanding somebody, go there, do work like this, and if you do not do this, your tithe will be, your pay will be withheld. And so it's a time that members, especially of the churches, this is an appeal to the members to wake up and ask, are we really doing the work of God? Is this organization the organization that was started back in the years? And are we perfecting it? Are we going forward, or are we going backward? And so our churches needs to arise. They need to have spiritual sinews so that the church members also may be able to face the crisis ahead. You know, when the church members are trained to rely on sitting and hovering ministers, and they themselves, they have nothing to do, they become weak. Their muscles become weak, and they cannot be able to fight the enemy. And so the Seventh-day Adventist is a movement. It's not just a church. It's a movement. And when you say that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a movement, what do you mean by a movement? It is something in motion. It is steps going forward. But when we decide to sit alone and just say a few people will do this and this, we cease to be a movement. The children of Israel had to move from Egypt to Canaan. It was a movement. And everyone was moving. It was not only the priest and the high priest and the 70 elders who were moving. Everyone was moving in that camp. Seventh-day Adventist churches today are to resort to a movement. Everyone in them has to be moving. And so God will still have a church, and the church, whether it has 2 or 3 people, they will do the will of God. And just to reiterate, God will choose humble men who are seeking to glorify his name and advance his cause rather than to honor and advance themselves. He will raise up men who have not so much worldly wisdom, but who are connected with him and will seek strength and counsel from above and do that will which he has revealed to them. There is so much truth which has been revealed to us on this issue of gospel order and organization. And as I said, we cannot play ignorance of these things. We can say that my people perish because of lack of knowledge. If it is knowledge we have been given, this is not to say in a bragging manner, but this is the reality of the matter. Much of the truth that we are studying right now has been revealed unto us. And you have to advance in light rather than to sit back. And so may the good Lord bless us, and may we think of the blessings that the Lord wants to restore, to bestow upon his church. And if really we do the work that the Lord is telling us to do, we shall see the Spirit accompanying. I want to leave us with an encouragement in the book of Mark chapter 16. I want to leave us with an encouragement in the book of Mark chapter 16. I think Mark chapter 16, and it is from verse 14 to verse 20. I want us to take these verses as a verse of encouragement for this presentation. Afterward, he appeared unto 11 as they sat at meat, and upbraided them with their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them which had seen him after he was risen. And sometimes the Lord can upbraid us because of our hardness of the heart of not doing the things that we should be doing. But after upbraiding us, he says that those he loves, he chastens. And so let us not take the messages so hard and think that the Lord is requiring of us to do something which is so hard to do. He is chastising those whom he loves. And after he does that, what do we have to do? We have to awake. Just as the apostles were upbraided and they awoke, so let us awake. Let us see what they did after they were upbraided. And he said unto them, Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Now, after upbraiding them, chastening them, he gives them a command. Verse 16, He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And this sign shall follow them that believe. In my name shall they cast out devils, they shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. Now, look at verse 19 and 20, which is our encouragement. So then, after the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up in heaven and sat on the right hand of God. And what did they do? Did they sit there complaining that Jesus Christ has upbraided us, he has disciplined us, he has chastened us? No. I want verse 20 to be our anchor point. And they went forth and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word with signs following. Amen. This was the response of the disciples after Christ chastising them and upbraiding them. Will we respond as they responded, or will we still harden our hearts and not go ahead with gospel order and organization? I leave that to you and to me. And we may say we are going to do what the Lord has said, but time will tell. But my prayer is that we may respond as the disciples responded. Otherwise, the Lord bless you, and may he keep you. Bye for now.